guys notes already, so that when someone is the first speaker, they also are the person who ends the round, and then one debater will speak once, the other one will speak twice. Okay, so a quick order of speeches. First affirmative is basically an intro speech, 7 minutes. You guys might want to take like a screenshot of this or something because it's kind of tedious to remember the times.
And
But
we will
basically,
also be uploading a video of this in case you
yeah.
need to reference this.
So first speaker, 7 minutes, which is basically the time for you guys to give your case, what do you guys have prepared. And then second is negation, 8 minutes, and then close after that is affirmative and negation with their rebuttals essentially, and then negation speaks 2 times in a row, and then affirmative closes. It's pretty basic. You guys all know it's already 20 minutes each.
Yeah, and so can you go back to this one? And so an important thing to notice here is that after affirmative second speech, negation gets 2 speeches in a row, which is like a really powerful moment for them because they get so much time to just build upon their case. But because of the powerfulness of the speaking block, which is the 8 minutes plus the 4 minutes, affirmation does get like the final word.
Okay. Want to cover this?
Yeah. And so when you're at AF, you want to talk about, or basically you want to structure your argument around a MATEF, which is mandate, agency, timing, enforcement, and funding. And so although it's kind of more loose in varsity and JV, it's good to kind of have these things just in case someone asks for them, and then you like have something to provide, as well as just making it seem like your plan has more ground and more basis than another person's plan would. And so your mandate is what the plan is actually going to be executing, and oftentimes the mandate is just like a copy paste of the resolution, but sometimes it can be more specific. The agency is who is going, but then if you do make your mandate more specific, then you have to relate it to how it is uh, in line with the resolution so that it makes sense. And then your agency is how you're, who
Hold
is
on just for a second, Mohan,
yeah.
sorry. So it could be that the text of the resolution is specific enough where you can just use the mandate, right? But it could be a little bit more general. For example, the United States should significantly increase its funding in, I don't know, nuclear energy or something. Well, the mandate if they're saying you should significantly increase funding, the mandate needs to be more specific than that, right? You're allowed to interpret that in a particular way and say, by significantly increased funding, what we mean is increase funding by $1.5 billion or something. That is the mandate. And so if the plan as expressed in the resolution is generalized, you're allowed to make it more specific. However, if the resolution specifically says the United States should re-enter the JCPOA, which is the Iran nuclear deal, that's fairly specific, right? And so your mandate would just be exactly what it says. Am I right, Mohan? Or
yeah, I would agree.
Yeah,
a lot of times the novice or the JV resolutions tend to be a little bit more generalized than like the varsity ones are. So you're allowed to interpret. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, adding on to Mr. Joseph said, if you're like in JV or varsity, a lot of times people are like more obscure with their planning. It's more like if there's timing, it's often like as soon as possible, and then agency and mandates like normal ways and means, and that's just like sometimes how varsity goes. Because I think in novice you kind of like sometimes they'll be contesting like their MATEF, but in varsity like, no one really talks about MATEF, and they just kind of go with like a plan, and then the more of the debate is centered around like the benefits and downsides to the plan. Sorry, Mohan, keep going.
So let me kind of speak to that. So let's get real brass tacks about this. Who wins in a novice debate versus who wins in a varsity debate, right? Because in a novice debate, it's a group of people that are kind of just getting their feet wet, starting to understand how to do debate. A lot of times the grasp of like policy is a little bit fudgy. Typically, the team that wins in a novice debate is the people that seem like they spoke the clearest and had the best structure to their plan. Like basically, if they didn't throw up and trip over their own shoelaces, they usually win because you have to recognize that the judges are parents, and these parents don't really know that much about these topics either. So whoever is most like clear and structured typically will get the W. In varsity, it's assumed that you can be clear and structured, and it's also assumed that you can come up with a plan text. So really, it's more about benefits versus costs, right? Or unintended consequences for, both good and bad. And so it really just comes down to like what type of person generally wins. In this case, MATEF is more important for novice as well as JV, because really the structure itself is part of the persuasiveness of your argument.
Yeah, and I would agree with what Mr. Pfister said. And so moving on to agency, it would be who is going to execute your plan. And so by execute, we mean kind of like pass the plan, because usually they're like, the concept is they're kind of like bills or um, like they are things that would need to be passed in like legislation. And so typically, if it's like a US like a USFG type uh, a USFG type uh, resolution, then it would be passed through Congress. If it was California, it would be California state legislature. If it was Britain, it would be Parliament, like Britain's Parliament, etc. And so it's basically just like whoever is the legislation of the resolution, then that would be who is going to execute your plan. And then, or Ryan, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay.
Well, let's say that the resolution says that the USFG or the United States federal government will do X. The problem is that the United States federal government is really not an agency as much as it is a collection of agencies. So if you look in the executive branch, you have all kinds of literal agencies like the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, the Department of the Interior, you have the Post Office, and all of these are technically part of the federal government just as much as the Marine Corps is. So let's say the resolution says the United States federal government should re-enter the Paris Climate Accord. Okay, which part of the federal government? What do you mean by that? Do you mean that the Post Office should re-enter the Climate Accord, or the United States Marine Corps should re-enter the Climate Accord? Because I don't think Paris would particularly appreciate U.S. GIs. They haven't appreciated coming into Paris, and they haven't appreciated that since like 1944. So you have to be specific about which part of the USFG is going to be responsible for enacting this. Typically, if it's legislation, it's going to be Congress, right? But if it's something like re-entering a treaty, Congress actually is not in charge of, they're in charge of ratifying treaties. They're not in charge of making treaties. That would be the executive branch or the department or the State Department. So you just have to pick whatever the right agency is. Typically, if it's something like we must pass a law to do X, that's going to be Congress. If it is we must enter some kind of international agreement or some kind of international intervention, whether that be war or otherwise, diplomacy or war, that's going to be the executive branch. That's all.
Yep. And so when you're talking about timing, especially in varsity, ends up being kind of like, it's like very kind of ambiguous, because oftentimes people just say as soon as possible. And it doesn't, honestly, I would say that saying as soon as possible is probably one of the better things you can do, because then they can't necessarily like use your timing against you by saying like, oh, that timing's unrealistic, oh, this is too much time, too little time, whatever. Just saying as soon as possible kind of gets it straight to the point, and is showing that although you have a plan and like a time, or like although you are wanting to get it done, it does not necessarily have like a set time constraint, because that could end up hurting your plan if you do set a time constraint on it. Ryan, do you have anything to add? Okay. So then moving on to enforcement. Enforcement is who is making sure that the plan is executed. And so if we were talking about maybe like an agricultural resolution, then you might want to think about like, let's say that we were talking about like a pharmaceutical resolution, then some things that might, so some of the enforcement might be like the DEA, like the drug enforcement or the drug, wait, sorry, not the DEA, sorry, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, because they are, the regulation of food and drug. And then it could also be like a portion of the US's departments that are, or like another enforcement for that could be one of the US departments, which is for like pharmaceuticals, medicine, healthcare, etc. And so you want to have your enforcement be mostly specific because that's how your plan is actually going to be, like executed. And so if it's too non-specific or is specific in the wrong way, as in like you use a wrong agency, it could be detrimental to your plan just because your enforcement would not work. Ryan, do you have anything to add? Okay, so then talking about funding, funding is like the source of money for your plan. And oftentimes when I debate, I just say the funding is normal ways and means because it's kind of hard to, it's oftentimes it's very hard to estimate how much a plan will actually cost, especially in like learning about it in 20 minutes can be difficult to understand the full cost of everything. And then another thing is like this funding is kind of nice to be ambiguous about because if you are ambiguous, then it's a little bit, it's a little bit easier to like structure your plan around the ambiguity. But um, it can end up being uh, a point of contention about like where is the money actually coming from. So if you say like normal ways and means, and then say like it's also coming, or like normal ways and means and coming from the discretionary budget of the US discretionary fund, then it kind of gives your plan more backing and more legitimacy. Ryan, do you have anything to add? Okay, then we can move on.
Okay, so now we basically have criteria, and often this is just like net benefits, but it depends on what the round is. I think you guys are also familiar with this. It's basically like what you're defining the rounds to be on, and net benefits are like criteria, which often net benefits is really important because you're basically like once both teams establish what the criteria is, then the judge basically has to evaluate the debate based on what the criteria is. So, for example, if it's net benefits, each team after the first round where they establish what the criteria is, they have to basically like link all of their arguments back to the criteria, so the judge can actually know who wins. And it's really important to also address this in your conclusion, or your closing speeches about the criteria, because like I said, this is like the weighing mechanism or the method that you will win the debate. And I think impacts, like I think we'll talk about the impact later in the, yeah, we'll talk about impacts later in the speech, but like just talking about why your plan or your arguments address the criteria and linking back every time is just something you should be doing in all of your points, in all of your arguments. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, and to add on to that, as Ryan said, a lot of the time you're just going to say net benefits, and I would say that it's kind of dangerous to say like to not say net benefits and to only say like social benefits or economical benefits or environmental benefits. But there's kind of a tricky thing that you can do where you say net benefits with an emphasis in environmental benefits, economic benefits, or social benefits. And that kind of shows that although every facet of your plan is beneficial, it can be extra beneficial in a certain region so that it's like giving you more credit. And then also because you define it that way, you can use it against the other team by saying their plan may abide by net benefits, but it is not, or like but it is not like environmentally beneficial, or it is not economically beneficial as our plan is because we're emphasizing it. And so, like for an agricultural one, we're talking about maybe like incentivizing the growth of carrots. you say that there's economic benefits because demand in carrots is going up or something. But then you also say that, so it's net benefits with an emphasis in economic benefits because it's beneficial, its benefits are net, but then it also has extra economic benefits.
Yeah, and just to add to what Mohan said, because the reason why you don't really want to go too specific with your criteria, because it's easily abusable, and the negation team can often just run like a theory of being abusive. Because if you're talking about um, like foreign policy, and then you're gonna talk about like how it benefits the U.S. people, that's definitely like abusive for affirmation. Because oftentimes, like when there's like a foreign policy topic, it's you're like debating on the benefits for both the country it's happening in and also like the U.S. So it really depends. So you have to be careful with your criteria, but like we've said, net benefits is normally like the way you want to go with.
Yeah. So moving on to the next slide. Ryan, do you want to cover this one or me?
I don't really mind.
Okay, so let's talk about contentions. Contentions are an assertion, claim, or point that supports your argument, and they're basically like the body paragraphs of your argument, and they follow the structure of warrants, grounds, and then, or sorry, grounds, warrants, and then impacts, and then basically the way it works is uh, your resolution is your plan, but then you have to explain like the benefits of your plan, and those are where your contentions come in. And so it needs a grounds, which is like a basically like a tagline or like a sentence to describe what the benefit is. So if the resolution was like the USFG should incentivize farmers to grow more carrots, then a grounds that could be like carrots were essential in like the COVID-19 vaccine or something. Like that could be your grounds, and then um, your warrant would be data about the grounds to support your grounds, and then the impact would be um, like how your contention relates to the resolution and to your criteria and why it's important. And so if the grounds was that carrots should be grown because they're essential in creating a COVID-19 vaccine, for the warrant, I would have to give some evidence on that. So I would say like, oh, like 50% of the vaccine consists of carrots. And then the impact would be like so many people are affected by COVID-19, and that's why we have to incentivize the growth of carrots is because COVID-19 is stopping it. Oh, obviously, this is just me making it up on the spot, but uh, yeah. So talking about, one very important thing is impacting, because when you impact, it like rationalizes your contentions and makes them like real, and it allows the judge to relate to them. And so it's important to do impacts.
Yeah, I want to say the most important thing in like a varsity debate round is definitely going to be impacts, because that's like kind of what separates JV and novice. Is basically like talking about why, like telling the judge why it actually matters. A lot of times, we'll cover this in some later slide, but most of the times we want to talk about like why the judge cares, and you have to link it to like people dying. If you're not like linking it back somehow to people dying, then I think your impact is not like going far enough, and it's not like reaching where it should be.
Yeah.
Well, I think most of you have already had a few debate rounds, but like I said, impact is going to be like the most important in higher level debate.
Yeah. Just really quick, a nice idea to remember is like impact out until you get death, destruction, or nuclear devastation. And it's like you really have to extend your impacts to make them like crazy important.
Yeah. You definitely want to make sure.
I can't tell you how many times I've watched a debate round in which one side makes the better argument, and then the college judge leans back and says, yeah, you had a great argument and great facts, and you didn't throw up on yourself, but you didn't impact out your argument. And so I'm going to give to the other side. And it's like, oh God, come on, man. Because a lot of the impacts should be implied. but they really want you to be explicit with your impact out. So for example, if you're arguing that the Green New Deal has all the benefits of providing like an increase of jobs, particularly an increase of jobs and economic productivity for people who've been left behind, like people of color and the impoverished, and then you just stop there, they're going to go, well, you say that it helps jobs, but the other side says that if we have the Green New Deal, it's going to spend so much money that it'll cause people to die from the shock of seeing the bill. So I'm going to give it to them. And you might think, well, it's pretty obvious that giving jobs and economic prosperity to people who have not had it, that's good, right? Well, you have to impact it out. And say, when people have jobs, they have the means to be able to afford all kinds of things like nutritious food, as well as pay for healthcare. And thus they can continue to live longer lives. They won't die from avoidable diseases and from malnutrition. And thus, when we give jobs to people and the economy increases, it actually results in longer life and higher quality of life, not only for children, but also for the elderly. And thus that's why we need to do it. You have to go all the way to some kind of life versus death issue. It seems onerous and silly because it kind of is, like they should be able to imply that, but a lot of times they will judge you on whether or not, like that's their gotcha thing. Did you impact out to the end? And if you didn't, they're going to take the other side's impacts, even when those impacts are like stupid, because they have them. Like the presence of a stupid impact is weighed more than the implied lack of presence of a better impact.
Yeah, just adding on to what Tristan said about like assumed arguments. So a lot of the time, like you'll think that you're winning or you think that you're losing a debate, but then like the judge might not catch, or they will catch it, but they're not gonna like do the connection for you. So a lot of times when there's things assumed in parliamentary debate, you have to make sure to address that in one of your speeches. And it's really important for you to make the connection for the judge, because the judge can't really like connect all the arguments for you in their flow. Even if they have it, they'll see it. But if they're like a decent judge, then they're not going to do that for you. So then you have to make sure you do that, especially like in your closing speeches. And we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but that's just something to keep in mind. Okay.
Yeah. So moving on to the next slide, let's talk about reputations. Reputations are obviously just your argument against the other side's contentions, and so it's kind of like intuitive on how you want to prove that their statement is false and then prove that your side is true. And then, as it says here, your contentions can indirectly refute the other side's case. So if one of your contentions is like a direct contradiction of one of the other side's contentions, then you can just say that it is a contention and a refutation one and the same because it directly contradicts their case and works in favor of yours. And so theoretically, every refutation should be beneficial for your case, but if it's not, then you're still degrading their case. So having refutations is relatively easy and incredibly helpful. And so the format is, of course, like kind of like restating their, or not restating, but restating the concept of their thesis. Sorry, not thesis. Sorry, restating the concept of their contention. And then after you do that, you oppose it. And so you say like, the contention, but this is the rebuttal to it. Or our opponent stated their contention, and this is why it's wrong. And then you give your refutation. So it's pretty intuitive, I think, and not too difficult.
Yeah, so like Mom said, you're all varsity or junior varsity, so you guys definitely have experience with refutations. And I think it's pretty intuitive, like Mom said. You just tell them why, you tell your judge why your opponents are wrong. Okay.
So do you want to do it?
No, that's fine. You can cover it.
Okay. So POIs are pretty easy. It's basically just a fancy term for asking a question during the debate round. And so during a debate round, you can only ask a POI during the during the constructive and rebuttal speeches. And so that would be the first 4 speeches, you can ask a POI, which means that you're asking a question about the debate. or sorry, about like what the person is saying, and it's kind of like challenging them mid or like mid speech, because they then have to answer your question and continue on. And so um, you can, during, if you are asked a POI, it's not like automatically you have to answer, right? During a debate, usually they will stand up and say that, like they'll say POI, and then you either answer the question or you say like I'll answer it at the end, and it's basically just um, like a question that happens mid debate.
Yeah, a lot of times, JV or varsity, they're just like, oh, I'll answer your question at the end, and then they just like talk for the rest of the time, and like never get your question. It's pretty common for that to happen, but if you're able to like ask them a question or need for clarification, it's always a good idea to do so. Okay, so this is kind of basic. I'm sure you guys have all run affirmative speech before. Like Mon said, oh yeah, if you want to first like define the resolution, and then you talk about your plan. You talk about the criteria, and then you just talk about your arguments. These are normally like benefits as to why your plan is good, and then you just talk about your evidence, and then sometimes you can address arguments that you think the negation will have if you have extra time, or if you have extra time, you can also just like talk about impact and why your side is better and why everything that you've said matters to the judge and what's gonna happen if your plan does not pass. And then same for negation. So negation is a little bit different because you have two jobs. First, you want to talk about your opponent's plans, say why they're wrong, why their plan doesn't work, and then you want to talk about your own plan, which is if you're running like a normal argument, then it's basically telling the judge why their plan doesn't work or why uh, the resolution is like it's just like it shouldn't resolve for affirmation. And then you can also make a counterplan. I think we'll have like a separate lecture just for a counterplan. But it's basically you're just doing the affirmations job as you're both trying to plan, and whoever's plan is better ends up winning. There's other things like planning counterplans, other things like that, theory, critiques. You can run on negation. Negation's a little harder, but normally normally the judge will actually have default negation because the debate round is something that affirmative needs to do. Like they're the ones like putting arguments, and if negation can just say no to all the arguments, they end up winning. So a lot of times, if the debate is like pointless, nothing happens, then the judge will default negation. But negation is also hard as, well, not necessarily hard. It's just hard to master because there's a lot of different things you can do as negation depending on what topic you think is fit. And then second affirmative, basically you just refute the negation contentions, and if they come up with a counterplan, you basically have to refute that. So it's just a time for negation or a time for affirmation to address the arguments and points of negation in their first speech. And this is also really important because the negation gets to speak twice after this. So you have to make sure that you are addressing all of negation's speeches, all of their points. And a lot of times, there's like a saying that a lot of our old presidents used to use. It's like if you drop an argument, it's like dropping an egg. You can't just pick it back up. Or if an argument's like a well-oiled machine. If one of the parts aren't working, then the machine like kind of just stops working, right? So you have to make sure to address every single one of your arguments. And in parliamentary, it's often that your opponents will just like talk as fast as they can, and you're gonna miss some arguments. So try your best to flow down all the arguments and make sure you guys are actually catching all of them. And then second negation, this is basically where the negation gets to talk about why affirmative is wrong and why their points still stand. You're basically just refuting what the affirmation has attempted to do against your plan. And then closing speech about negation. This is when negation gets to go twice in a row. you're basically just weighing impacts for the entire speech here, telling the judge why you guys deserve to win the debate today, and where the main points of clash were, as basically what like the main arguments. Because at the end of the day, a lot of your debates will boil down to a few arguments. You guys, there's gonna be a lot of arguments across the board, but there's gonna be a few that will decide the fate of the debate because they're the ones that are more important. And it's like pretty common to you'll know when the arguments are important because most of the time that's where the affirmation is going to be talking about, and then that's where your team's also going to be talking about. And then finally, we have the affirmative rebuttal closing speech, and you can't introduce new information here, and it's same with negation, but there's often like this quirky thing where the negation will be like, or sorry, affirmation will be like, oh, this is like our golden moment where we have to like talk about a new argument that the negation brings up. And a lot of times you'll be like, point of order, judge, they're like not allowed to talk, and then they'll like respond to that. So then there's just something you have to keep in mind when you're debating in like JV or varsity. Like I said, summarizing clash of debate and the weight impact is really important. And then a lot of times people will do like, this is for both negation and affirmation. It'll be like, this is in our world, this will happen. In their world, this will happen. You just talk about why in your world, everyone's gonna be a millionaire and how your world is so amazing and awesome. And then how negation is basically like causing homelessness and just a bunch of like, you just emphasize all the negations downsides. Okay, Mohan, do you want to add anything I just said?
Yeah, so basically for the last two speeches, I think it's most important to remember to do a comparison on like how each one is, like each case is, or like the effects of each case. And then also you have to show the judge that you are better than the other for some reason, and like try and make that reason as strong as possible because that can be like a deciding factor of the debate. And then the last one is make sure that you mention anything that was not refuted or rebutted because those can be debate winners. Just like literally one thing that's not refuted can win you a debate. So make sure that you mention everything that was not, because those just get you more and more points.
Yeah, often if something is dropped at the opposing team, a lot of teams would be like, oh, judge, please flow that through as like something that wasn't contested in the debate, and just like basically 3 points for normally it's affirmation, 3 points for affirmation to just win the debate based on the status that the negation was not able to refute one of their benefits. Okay. Impacts. So basically, like Mullen was talking about, magnitude, scope, and probability, and also Mr. Kiss was talking about. You basically want to link this to why it matters. What's going to happen once the plan is resolved or once the plan passes, right? Like magnitude. Like what's going to happen? Like who is going to be affected? How many people are going to be affected? How the economy is going to be affected? How like the country itself is going to be affected? And scope is basically how they feel this, how they feel, or what's going to happen to the daily lives of these people. Like what exactly will happen? Will they be starving? Will they lose their jobs? Are people going to die? And then probability, which is basically like how likely will this happen? And probability is like less important. Mostly just we'll talk about magnitude, scope, how people will be dying, how they'll lose their jobs. But probability is also important as we want to talk about why, like how likely this happen. Like why the judge care that that's even a possibility that it will occur. Because if the negation can just come up and be like, yeah, judge, this is not going to happen. You definitely want to like argue how this is very possible if it can happen, especially if the plan passes, and especially if one of your arguments is based on an aspect of the plan that's going to pass. Go on.
Yeah. So, as Ryan said, many of the important things are the probability, scope, and magnitude. And I think magnitude is one of the most important because it shows the real, like, I guess, value behind the impact. Because like although all like both will be bad, comparing the death of like one person, like the impacted death of one person versus like a million people, right? You would weigh that the million people is more, it has a higher magnitude than that of the death of one person. And so uh, if your impacts outweigh the others, then that's like one of the big deciders. And so with that, I think Ryan covered everything.
Okay, and then types of topics. Basically, policy is the most common. In varsity, you might run into like value or fact, which are kind of more absurd topics because no one really knows how to do them. Because for value, you're just arguing like, why, like, is this good? And if good is very subjective, so depending on how you prep the round, I think we'll go into more depth like on each of these topics. But for everything we cover is mostly most applicable to policy. And policy, yeah.
Yeah, and so although all of the forms of parliamentary debate have some type of morality linked to them, or except for fact debate, but or I guess for policy debate, it has some morality. Value debate is like all morality, and fact debate has like the least or none or no morality involved in it. Because fact is based on if something is true or false. Value is based on is something good or bad, which is, you know, very like morally is like a moral debate. And then policy is sometimes involves morality.
Yeah, Ms. Kissler, I see you just joined the room. Is there anything you'd like to add on the three topics? Okay. Um, okay. This is definitely one of the more important aspects of parliamentary debate because a lot of times the opponents don't even know what they're talking about, so they should like say a bunch of random things, and it's your job as the person who's flowing down their arguments to flow down basically. And there's a lot of different methods to do so. I'm sure you guys all have your own methods to do so, but we'll probably go into like more efficient flowing methods in the future debate meetings. But normally this is what someone's like flow sheet will look like. There's like six columns for each of the debate rounds, so each of the speeches, and you kind of just flow down like what your opponents are saying. And it's often useful to use like different colored pens or different colored pencils, and then like using arrows and things to highlight where the arguments are and if your arguments have addressed these or not.
Yeah.
Okay, prepping for a round. Everyone uses different types of websites. Make sure to use credible ones if you're using like blogs or things like that, and then try to remember your sources. So most of the time, people will be using like just like the first Google search they find. So make sure that's credible, like I said. And if you do somehow forget your source, try to be convincing in the source that you're going to make up, because in parliamentary debate, it's kind of a quirkier type of debate because no one really knows the sources. Like no one really fact check these type of things. Like there's no cards like they have in public forum or anything like that. So if you do forget your source, just try to make one up or try to make it convincing at least. And then
Point of parliamentary debate is actually explicitly not to provide like quotations on quotations. That's really for the other types of debate. It's supposed to be more free flowing, but sometimes they'll try to do this technique where they'll like gotcha, like, oh, so you're saying that climate change is real? Do you have a source for that? And it's like something which is just like manifestly true, but they try to call you on it. So yeah, they are usually not acting in good faith when they try to ask for sources. A lot of times the judges don't even really know, like, it depends. If you have a college judge or whatever, that's different, but a parent judge might not know that like sources are not really required. So if that happens, I don't want to say make one up, but I will say you could use the LIE method and try to demonstrate that you got it from some kind of website or like source that you read last week, but you can't recall exactly which one.
Oh.
By LIE method, I mean lie and make one up.
Ryan, can you go back to the flow really quick? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'm not advocating for lying at all. It's just a strategy you have in parliamentary debate.
So usually in debates when you flow, it'll look. So I judged a debate tournament last year, and it'll look something like this. Most people flow with their pages sideways, but it looks like this, where you divide the page into columns and then you write different things on it. And so using like like basically flowing is incredibly important to do because it allows you to keep track of things better. And actually, I was thinking that we'll release my notes so that you guys can review like how to flow properly.
Yeah,
So
flowing is very important. Like sorry, like Juan said, because like I said, you want to make sure to capture every single argument, and flowing sometimes like will win you and lose you debate if you catch something that opponents have forgotten. Sorry, Juan. What were you gonna say? Okay. Now we have generating arguments. So a lot of the times you might get a topic which you have no idea like what it's about, and you might spend a lot of your time like googling like what even is this topic is talking about, especially in like more absurd terms like Berkeley. They'll give you like a random topic that you've never heard about, and you're just like, what am I looking at here? So then a lot of times you can default to arguments, which is something is like how does it affect the economy? How does it affect politics? And how does it affect people? And why I should care about it? And then a lot of times you link this, there's just also the impact about people not dying. And this is just like default arguments that most of the time when you have a topic, you'll definitely link it to the economy. You'll be like, how will this affect the economy, whether it be foreign or domestic? And then you also want to talk about a lot of times there'll be like an environmental argument where you're like, how will this affect the environment? How will this affect other countries' environments? And how will this affect people in those countries? So this is just something to go to if you're out of ideas about like specific arguments that are for the topic. Mohan, Mr. Kisser, I'm sure you guys have a lot to add to this.
I mean,
So-
I typically take the approach, that Marx took, which is to advocate that basically the materialistic approach, which is that everything is intrinsically economic in nature and everything is intrinsically political in nature, and those two are actually not different things, honestly, right? That the economy is really the description of how people transfer resources from place to place, and politics is about who has the power to transfer those resources. So anything which is economic can be political, and anything which is political can be economic, because the two are the same. So just keep that in mind, that like Marx was a really smart dude when he kind of noted that concept, that power is inextricably linked to the concept of economy. I would also say that it may not be true that in every country that there is a topic that they can link it to international politics, but because the United States in the post-World War II era is basically the architect and the glue of the international order. I mean, although it's been degraded significantly over the last 4 years due to like our erraticness, but in general, it can be said that the US domestic policy has an immense impact on also foreign policy as well. What we do matters, right? Our economy is the biggest in the world. Our politics affect other people. Our military interventions affect other people. Securitization affects other people. And so if you want to generate an argument and you're kind of like out of stuff, and it's a domestic issue, you could find a way to extend it out to say, and how will this affect our neighbors? How will this affect Mexico? How will this affect Canada? How will this affect the Middle East? How will this affect the EU? In terms of trade, how will it affect it in terms of security? How will it you know what I'm saying? So that's something also that you can extend the argument, is recognize that the United States is kind of in a unique position in which what we do here also affects a lot of other things outside. I mean, that's true. All countries affect other countries, but our gravitational pull is such that you can extend out a lot of different connections.
Yeah, you probably find yourself like, depending on like what like debates that your team has, you probably find yourself like always arguing like a specific topic. If it's like something like environmental or something related to like foreign policy, it's always like good to have like these kind of arguments like up your sleeve in case you just run out of ideas, and just like to basically like default to these if you're out of ideas.
Mm-hmm. The one that really like baffled me, I think it was a Berkeley one, is it was something to the effect of the UN should put an immediate moratorium on the harvesting of horseshoe crab blood or something. And I was like, what in the heck are you talking about, man? And so my initial thought was, okay, this is an environmental issue, but I could not imagine why they were harvesting horseshoe crabs in the first place. I can say that the impact of overharvesting is obviously an environmental one, but what are the benefits of it? And so we had to like look it up, and it turns out it's like really important or it's being used as like genetic material for certain like bioengineering. Like there's fields of using their chemicals in their blood to like try to do a bunch of different stuff. So Berkeley tends to like that kind of thing. Because Berkeley itself as an institution is really into bioengineering, a lot of the topics which they choose typically have to do with that. And so you have to get really flexible and try to think, the nag on that one is, or there's some obvious environmental impacts, but a lot of times you have to think in kind of ways which are not natural, at least not for me. I don't necessarily think about benefits of like biology. So that's another part too, is you get to learn which kinds of topics tend to come out of which sorts of debate tournaments. What I would say is that debate tournaments which are held at universities tend to have more topics which are scientific in nature and sort of like ethical in nature when it comes to science, versus high school. It typically is more economic oriented as well as like politically oriented. So you can sort of anticipate that ahead of time.
Yep. Okay. I think we wanted to cover this next meeting because kind of running out of time here. So
yeah,
if there's anything you guys have any questions on, I think it's all review for most of our debaters. If you're varsity, especially if you're JV, this should also be review. Are there any questions for Mr. Kistler, Mohan, or I? Anyone need clarification on anything? Okay, so,
Sorry, just
Yeah.
before we end the meeting, just like to say that our next meeting will be next Tuesday, and we'll be covering, as Ryan said, Mr. Kisler's lecture on policies on the the California ballot and all the propositions on it. And that'll be really important, I think, especially for going to any tournaments that are going to be coming around soon. And if you guys have any questions, you can email me or Mr. Kisler or any of the other officers, and we'll get back to you.
Mohan, and Ryan, I have a capstone question to kind of finish this off, if that's okay. So you guys are in varsity. What's the biggest adjustment or surprise that you had to make moving from sort of like a varsity novice level to from a JV novice level to a varsity level? Like, what is the most fundamental difference between the ways those debates typically go down? What do we need to know?
I think one of the most important things is you realize that when you move from novice to a JV and varsity level, people start to get more complex, people start to get more aggressive, and people start to get more theoretical. And so in regards to those, complexity would be just expanding on the ideas within the topic. And so you really have to keep account of everything that they're saying, or else you'll get left in the dust and you'll miss a point which was crucial, and then it'll lose you the round. In regards to being aggressive, people are fast talking, people are they are very good at saying things which make sense if you understand them, but if you don't understand them, like, you'll not necessarily be able to understand what they're saying and not be able to refute it properly. And when I get into saying like more theoretical, it would just be things like theory and critique, which would go along with complexity, but are kind of like, I would say, separate from, like, a separate form of the complexity of higher levels of debate. And that's just because of the kind of like strangeness that they have within the parliamentary debate scene.
Okay, so I agree with exactly what Mohan said. A few things myself. So first, judges are actually like smart, and they actually like know what you're talking about. They're not gonna be like, yeah, so this team talked a little. They were nicer, so we're gonna give them the win. Sometimes like the judge will understand that both teams are garbage and that they have no idea what they're talking about, and then the judge will tell you that. So that's just nice to hear. And then, like Mohan said, the people in varsity are definitely a lot more aggressive, and they also a lot more smart. Like the people, like, you'll probably definitely get rolled at your first like varsity or JV debate, because you're probably gonna come against like some like 20-year debater, or not 20, like a 8-year debater who like memorized like 6 different like cases for each argument. So that's something you just have to expect. Like people are actually good in, like, they're strong in JV and varsity. It's just hard to like get away with like just saying random things, saying random arguments, because people will like definitely penalize you for that.
Yeah. What I would say, just to kind of finish that off too, you're totally right that you might run into some debaters which are either hyper aggressive or hyper intellectual, and sometimes you might feel intimidated. What I will say is that the types of debaters that kind of demonstrate that alpha activity, they have paid for it by which I mean this is the one thing that they do, right? This is all they do all day. And they have probably put a lot of their, I would say, their emotional self-worth into being super good at this. And so winning is the most important thing. And I just want to encourage you to say that Valley Christian is not that kind of school. You guys do a bunch of different stuff. You have athletics and you have arts and you have education, you have debate. And I'm really proud of the team that we built here, because I feel like at the end of the day, my goal is that, or our goal is that we become more aware and more well-rounded. And so if you come against somebody that beats you down because they have this like aggressive alpha mindset, just I wouldn't feel bad about it. It's okay to respect people for their intellect, but also recognize that that kind of thing comes with a cost, and it may be a cost that you're not willing to pay, and that's all right. You know what I mean? So I want to encourage you that like defeat in this particular case is not necessarily a sign of failure. It's a sign of like you learned something, you grew, but also you are a well-rounded person. As long as you understand the topic in its sort of general terms and you're willing to engage in the dialogue, then you are debating. And that's going to be much more valuable in the rest of your life than having a couple trophies on your wall when you're like a 40-year-old man, right? And you don't know how to talk to people.
Yeah, definitely. You'll definitely recognize schools in the future that you're like, oh no, we're pairing against this school. Like, there's definitely schools that like have coaches to like write their case for them, and they also have like large databases of just like a bunch of pre-written cases. You'll see like people walking like a sheet of paper that's like fully in like pencil, then you know like they're definitely what Ms. Kisser was talking about. Like they just like memorize debate cases in the free time.
Yeah. Which is impressive, but also I don't know that's necessarily something we want to emulate. I think you're going to win debate cases. We are a strong team, and so I would not despair if you lose cases to these people, because I don't know. Sometimes they may be good at debate, but they're not really great people. So I would not envy them necessarily. Just do your best, and also it makes it even sweeter when you knock someone out. Or you knock a team out and they've been acting like jerks the entire weekend. It's like, just right. That is the great feeling.
Yeah, this is parliamentary debate is definitely an experience, especially when we're actually able to go in person again.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you guys.
All right, thanks for your time.
So with that, I think we'll end the meeting. So thank you guys very much.
Awesome.
Thank you. Oh shoot, Mark. I mean, Andrew, I forgot you were here. Andrew, you should like ask to talk, bro.
No, I was here the entire time. Like, I actually paid attention to the entire thing.
Oh my god, you should have.
It was a good presentation, guys.
Should have talked, bro.